One. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Shameless Facebook Friday Lives, our special series that starts today on grief, grace, and the holidays. I'm Dr. Patti Ashley, and thanks so much for joining us. Been doing these Facebook Friday Lives for a few months now and wanting to support people through all of what's going on in the world, and especially now that we're coming upon the holidays. And I think that, my book, Letters to Freedom, that is a memoir of grief, and called that because my partner Lawrence Freedom, his last name was Freedom, um, in honor of continuing his work on great grace and grief and fear, and also in honoring my experience of grief and trying to help people. So I thought doing a Shameless Facebook Live series on grief, grace, and the holidays was perfect because we're heading into the holidays, which oftentimes brings up grief and challenges, and we've got a lot of extra ones on top of it this year. So I'm excited to introduce my first guest to kick us off today. She's a spiritual companion, a grief counselor. She's a dream worker. I had the opportunity to meet her when we were honoring the loss of our dream teacher, Jeremy Taylor, going on 3 years ago. And I find out that she's had worked quite a bit with Jeremy, who's a really important teacher in my world. And so I'm excited to introduce Robyn Hubard. Hi, Robyn.
Hi, Patty. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here.
Thanks for being here. I was excited when you said you'd wanted to do this because I know your work is pretty much in the grief world, and mine kind of expands out from grief and shame and parenting, and I do a variety of things in my work, but you really focus on helping people. I love the word spiritual companion, helping people through grief. Um, so tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into this work and just what it's like for you to help people walk through grief.
Yeah. Let's see. Where to begin? I got into this work really. I think it started with my mom died when I was 20, and she first became sick when I was 13. And at that time, she was my closest companion, just, heart shattering loss. And she really taught me about just being present. She really role modeled for me being present in her own life through those years of having cancer, and just staying present and finding new ways to be in life and approach life with difficult challenges. And just before she died, the last 30 days of her life, she had a brain tumor, and she was no longer making sensical sentences, but she was in this kind of bliss state. But she hadn't spoken a sensical sentence in almost 30 days, and there was an unspoken agreement in our family, or maybe it was even spoken. I was pretty young, so I don't remember explicitly, but I do remember the agreement that we all held to not cry in front of her, so that she didn't like catch on that she was dying.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And because
Wow.
she had this brain tumor, and she was, like as if, she was in this kind of bliss state, but she recognized us, but she couldn't really um,
Oh,
communicate well. So we had this, there was this agreement to not cry in front of her. And we were trying to keep her at home. And I went back into her bedroom, and I was just stroking her arm. And that was kind of, we weren't a very touchy family at that time. And so it was a really special moment for me. I was just stroking her arm gently.
mhm.
And she looked right at me, and she goes, "Ooh, that feels good." So, of
Oh,
course, I start crying.
oh,
She looks at me again straight in the eyes, and she goes, "It's okay to cry."
oh
It
my
was like as
God.
clear as day.
Oh,
It was like she just sort of burst out into this, this clarity,
wow.
and that she acknowledged my tears. And she went on in her own kind of broken way to basically tell me she knew she was dying. Of course, she knew she was dying. And
Mm.
so we had this moment together where,
Mm.
of course, the tears are just pouring down my cheeks. And she died a few days later. And so those were really, that was my last conversation with her. And that was a really powerful and profound moment for me. And it was her last gift to me as a mom, and a reminder that it's okay to cry. And that has really guided me through my life and through subsequent challenges that I've experienced, some, life-threatening diagnoses and other difficult losses, including Jeremy, who you mentioned, our mentor, um, that it's okay to cry. And I found through the years, as I grew older and went through difficult challenges, that somehow, maybe it was that gift she gave me, but somehow I found the capacity to let myself rest into my own grief. And I found like a bottom to it. I found myself
Mm.
like a ground. And
Mhm.
somehow I don't really know how I got there, but I was able to trust that ground. And I recognized over time that I had this capacity to not only trust that or know that for myself, that I could companion others in this,
Mm.
times of devastation, sorrow, shattering loss. And so it's been not only my gift, and it feels like kind of my purpose for being here, but my way that I also honor my mom, because I
Mm.
feel like she's really guided me. So
Well, I know there's a thing now that people are calling doulas. My sound is kind of echoing. Is it echoing on your end?
I don't hear an echo.
See, I told you we were knocking on wood at the beginning here, making sure everything was right, and of course, something had to happen like that.
Yeah.
Especially, this such a beautiful, touching story that you just shared. Um, okay, it's sounding a little bit better now. Good.
Okay.
Okay, so death doulas, doulas who birth people into the world and people who help them, you know, birth into whatever the next world is kind of a mothering thing, and that's what I was thinking when you were talking, was that idea of spiritual companion is actually a spiritual mother, help. And my work is so much around mothering and the experiences of women and men as mothers, because men mother now too. It's not a gender thing. It's more of a nurturing, holding people through life. And I'm wondering, first of all, I want to tell everybody, I'm not sure we have anybody on with us, but if you are here, to let us know you're here, say hello. And if you have any questions for Robyn, to chime in. Um, and now there's some loud trucks outside my door. Are you hearing that?
I can't hear that.
Okay, good. All right. Anyway, so question came up for me when you were talking was this idea of, let me see if I can use your language. You said, fall into my grief and find my ground. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Tell us more about that. What does that mean for you, and maybe how you help others as well with that?
Well, I would just say, in my own experience, and also as I companion and witness others, the biggest fear, because we don't have a lot of good role modeling or ritual around grief in our culture, unfortunately.
Mhm.
Um, the biggest fear about our grief is that if we start to feel it, we're gonna fall into a rabbit hole and get lost and be this never-ending
Yes.
fall. Um, and so what again, I guess what I found somehow, maybe with the support of my mom, but I just found that when I let myself sink in and I gave myself permission, and it's wonderful that you said the mothering, because I really attribute this a lot to the healthy attachment that I felt through my mother.
Mm.
Um, and I feel like I had this, and I know not everyone has that. So I feel like that was a real gift for me, that I felt that support and that grounding from her,
Mhm.
so that when I found myself in my own free fall of grief when she was gone, I, again, I just, I found this place where it wasn't a free fall anymore. It was almost like this nurturing cradle. And I don't know how to really explain it, how I got there, um, but that was my experience. And so the ability to recognize when I'm working with people the fear of that free fall, and how to support them, not only to maybe access lifelines so that we can access a little bit more sense of control. Maybe there's people that we identify that are true support people as our lifelines to reach out to, or whether people begin to understand that sort of neuroplasticity, or that ability to dip into our grief and then come out and kind of and allow ourselves. Of course, the waves sometimes come so intensely that we can't really control that, but we can begin to find some flexibility and find some safety in our grief if we set it up properly. And so help people begin to trust some sense of lifeline, and then drop just a little bit more deeply, so that they can feel and acknowledge something underneath them, some safety net that maybe eventually lowers until they feel, hopefully, some sense of ground.
That's beautiful. And I love the way you talked about the attachment, because my research around shame and my book that just came out on shame is all about how the brain creates a sense of emotional safety. And so, that for me, when you were just talking, was that connect the dot between that emotional safety and being held, like when we talk about attachment theory. We talk about the early caregiver child relationship creating the neurons in the brain and even the nervous system that say, I'm safe. And that's what you're describing when and it's beautiful because you're describing being held. And yeah, and I think, moms get a bad rap because we have so much to learn on how to really hold children, because it's so new. I always say, we didn't know until the mid 20th century that the way we were treating kids was not really helping them grow that emotional safety. And so we're having to unlearn and relearn. And so the process of watching somebody die and witnessing that is um, such a huge opportunity for us to really grow ourselves. I think um, death is our greatest teacher, is what I believe to be true, because we learn so much because we've lost this person that we really care about, and never to be in that form again in relationship. And so, and you mentioned neuroplasticity and the up and in and out of the different waves of grief. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that too. Some people may not know what neuroplasticity is, which I think is important, because that's part of the hope that we can create this emotional safety for ourselves, even if our mothers are no longer here. Or
Yes.
so.
Yes, and so neuroplasticity is the ability. It's like the flexibility of our brains to go between states. So getting into a highly charged emotional state or a fear state, but also having the brain also having the capacity to shift our attention to something that feels better, that feels safer. Recognizing safety, recognizing something that feels more supportive, and that helps. Um, yeah, it just helps that our ability to tolerate those more difficult states more easily. And so I talk about that a lot in working with clients, is
Mhm.
is recognizing, and sometimes in the midst of grief, this is maybe shifting a little bit away, but it's like those moments of clarity and beauty can pierce through some of the most difficult, and
Right,
primal shattering moments, and suddenly it's this moment of grace.
right.
And so that again is like, it's our nervous system's capacity to hold both at the same time, and to access both at the same time.
Mhm.
So that,
Beautiful. Yeah. And that's exactly what this is all about. And the course that I've got online that's going to be launching next week is transforming grief and fear into love and grace. Transforming probably isn't the best word, but it's more of integrating and allowing it. And I hear Jeremy in the back of my head, the way he used to talk about paradox.
yes,
It's such a paradox of both and we have a hard time with that because we want things to be all good, and if they're not all good, then they must be bad. And so grief hurts, so I want to get out of grief, and then I want to go over to feel better. But to be able to be in what you just described, I think is key. um, and you and I were talking before we went live about patience and waiting. We've been going through this in the election, and we've been going through this in the pandemic. And let's admit, uh, Americans aren't really great at waiting. I'm just going to say, I don't know about other cultures because this is where I've been born and raised. And I know that we like things fast. We like results. We like, I keep looking at all the newscasters on MSNBC and all the news that I'm watching, and they're there like at 11 o'clock at night. And I usually don't watch the news in the morning, but I turn it on this morning because I know it's close, and it's the same people in different clothes. I'm like, when are they sleeping? So,
never.
so there's this waiting and elongating the process that oftentimes is uncomfortable for people because we just want the solution. I have a lot of clients that say, well, when I get there, when my life is better, when this is over, then we have this promised land syndrome, as opposed to how do we be where we are right now. And I think that's the election results being prolonged, the pandemic, the situations that we're living in right now are giving us opportunities to do that, as does grief. um, so, and when you said earlier about the dark hole, people are so afraid to feel the uncomfortable feelings because they think that's gonna be that way forever, and they're never gonna get out of this darkness. And
Yeah.
so I think patience, wouldn't you say, is important in the grieving process?
Yes, patience, absolutely. And in something you said earlier about you were referring to mothering and deconstructing beliefs and habits and patterns around mothering. I think that's part of what we're doing now too, in the midst of this pandemic and the election and all these different challenges, the climate challenges, all the things, and the racial inequity challenges that we're the uncertainty that we're facing, and this enduring time, like you're speaking to, that is so difficult. I feel it's sort of giving us curriculum in a way to
Yeah.
slow things down and to deconstruct the habits and the patterns that we have created around grief or grieving or the lack thereof it or the phobia of it. And I think I mentioned to you, but before this started, I recently heard a wonderful teacher, kind of a cultural transformation and spiritual teacher, Bayo Akomolafe. If you don't know him, he just seems to be around more and more now. He just recently said, times are urgent, let us slow down.
Mm.
And that in these times of urgency, how important it is to slow down. And that brings us back to that ground. It's like to kind of slow it down so that we can drop in and 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 I always say how important it is that we need to reclaim grief and dying and uncertainty as part of our soulfully lived life,
Yeah.
where it has been marginalized.
Mm.
Grief, death, uncertainty, all these things
Yeah.
have been
Yeah.
marginalized in our culture, and that now that we need to kind of reclaim these things and bring them back into the fold of a soulfully lived life. These things are part of our soulfully lived life. It's not like you try and deal with these things and tidy them up over here so that we can get back to our good life over here. It's
Yeah.
just like reclaiming and reframing it
Yeah.
all together.
Yeah.
That does take some.
I love that so much. And that quote, times are urgent, slow down. I
Let us.
mean, that just says it all, doesn't it? I mean,
Yes.
you know, we want to hurry up and get through things and be done with it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. When really life is all about embracing all of it. and being able to hold ourselves through the um, parts that are difficult to tolerate because they don't feel good. A lot of what's going on right now doesn't feel good. We're in collective grief.
Yeah.
If you think about how our lives have changed and we're not able to access a lot of the things that we've been doing in our normal lives, and we just went on to more restrictions here in Colorado, and then the horrible, horrible devastation of people who've been dying alone in hospitals from this disease and other things. And so the collective grief is pretty intense right now, and
Yeah.
trying to help people, have that um,
Yes. And the
ground.
isolation is so,
Mhm.
even if, yes, people who are dying alone and people who are living alone, the elders in nursing homes that can't have, or nursing facilities that can't have visitors, or all of us who are, having to stay more at home, while it's conducive to the slowing down
Mhm.
piece, it's also very isolating. And that, I think that really adds to the grief. And I think, again, like we have been trained to grieve in isolation. And I think again, the endure how do you say the word, the enduringness, or the the enduring nature of
Mhm.
this whole thing is like it's ripping us all apart
Mhm.
as far as
Yeah.
this isolation piece. And that's that deconstruction. Like, this is not working. The mental health, our mental health capacities to be alone in the midst of all this is not holding up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough because we're so wired for connection, and it's so brand new, mental health, and really what do we need for our wellness, emotional wellness. We talk so much about our physical
Mhm.
health, and there's no stigma around the fact that, I have heart disease or I have COVID. Not me personally, thank God. But for somebody to say that, but if somebody says, "Oh, I'm depressed," it's like, ooh,
Yeah,
whoa, let's
yeah,
put you over here with the lepers, instead
yeah,
of going, you know what? If I say to people, if you're not depressed now,
yeah,
then I'm concerned.
exactly.
There's a level of sadness that we're all feeling collectively. It's some of my young teens say it's an existential depression. It's like we're all grieving the loss of something,
Yeah,
many things.
yeah. And I always like to say too, for me, I always like to talk about the Latin root of the word emotion is emovere, which
Mm.
literally means to move through.
Oh, beautiful.
Yes, yeah, I love to share that because
Never heard that.
the importance of our emotions, like our emotions are meant to move through us. And
Mm.
to me, the state of depression is really kind of is oftentimes kind of a inability to allow emotions, like no place for emotions to go, and we get uh, we just get stuck in a particular emotion, and we're just there's no movement, no access to movement.
Mm.
And so again, this whole idea of times are urgent, let us slow down in a way so that we can find the rhythm
Yeah.
of the movement of our emotions,
Mm.
and find ways to, in healthy ways, because we're seeing a lot of unhealthy ways that emotion is being expressed, through violence and things. Although, not to get into the whole racial thing too deep, but uh, there are some ways that repressed emotion sometimes just explodes. So
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
a different conversation. But the idea of really, really allowing ourselves to find healthy expression and movement for all the authentic emotions that are stirring in these difficult times of uncertainty and loss and grief. And
Mhm.
so,
Absolutely. And I always say, because I heard John Bradshaw say it, and some other people have said it, that if you look at the word emotion, it's motion. And Bradshaw would say it's energy in motion and it
yes,
needs to move. But I never, gosh, I'm so glad you shared that the root word means to say it again, of
it's
emotion,
to move through.
to move through. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
'Cause that's the thing, we try and that's what one of my first teachers, and, when I started my graduate work was saying, "You can't go around grief. You have to go through it. You have to move through it. And she also said that all depression is unresolved grief. And those were big. I was 30 years old. I hadn't done any grief work after my father died because I was, in this, you know,
Yeah.
family where you just tidy things up and you go on with your life. And
Yeah.
it's, you don't talk about it. And so 20 years later in this class, she's like, you have to go through it. And it's, depression is, and so that's when I really started doing my grief work and really, got knee deep into my own personal grief, and then, how it informs me in um, my work with people who are going through grief. And yeah, we have to go through it, and we don't, where's the safety net? Where's the safe place to fall? Where's the, the cultural norms that say this is okay?
Yeah.
That's really a big piece for me, is um, giving
And,
people permission.
yeah. And I also think that the invitation of these very difficult times, difficult, but is for connection. Is that we have to find ways
Mhm.
to reach out and make connection, and because we're really not meant to do this alone, you know.
Right, right.
And so, yeah,
Yeah, and it's hard. It's so tricky, right? It's such a paradox because it's like, how do we connect when we have all these restrictions? And I was saying to you before we started, I said, I'm loving doing these Facebook Lives because, I live by myself with my
yeah,
cat.
yeah,
And so I get to connect with you and people that I care about on Fridays, and have the Facebook community, share. And I feel it helps me with connection,
yeah,
because it's so important. We definitely need to find those connections. And what I found, is what I've learned is you have to tell the story of grief at least 100 times, again, to move through it, and to find those, what I call enlightened witnesses, that are able to let us tell the story, is so rare,
yeah,
because most people want to, the mirror neurons get activated when they're listening and they're feeling your grief, that they want to fix it. They want to get to this neat, tidy, move on place.
yeah,
And really what we need when we're in grief is to be held like a mother, like a baby, like a baby. I love that. The image of what you said at the beginning, it really is like mothering. We need a mother to be there and say, they're there, I got you. And it doesn't feel good. It's not like we're saying, stop being uncomfortable. We're saying, I'm holding you.
yeah. I mean, really, yeah. The important thing is that is to bear witness to each other and to develop those capacities within ourselves, and to bear witness not only to ourselves and our own pain, but to others.
Mhm.
And that brings me to another thing that my mom really gave me. She After she died, we found this photo album. I mean, we thought it was really goofy at the time, but but as I've grown older, I've come to so appreciate it. And I think, unfortunately for my kids, I've sort of become this same person. But she had a photo album of pictures of trees and little captions underneath the trees of like what the tree made her think of, or what it reminded her of, or what it evoked in her. Yeah, it's really cool. And so I use the symbol of a tree a lot, again in honor of her.
Uh-huh.
Um, and through this four paths of soulful living and grieving that I have kind of distilled and cultivated, and I can get more into the four paths, but just to speak to this whole idea of how to bear witness, it's
Mhm.
and the symbolic nature of the tree, and how trees have withstood so many storms. I mean, the many trees have been standing hundreds, some thousands of years or more. Um, that they've withstood so many storms, and they actually grow stronger. And so in
Mhm.
these workshops that I do around these four paths, it's like we're how can we create the our own bodies as the trees to bear witness of each other, and in that way we're planting a forest of mutual support together.
Mhm.
So it's another way to it's the mothering piece, but it's also like to just stand next to another tree that got maybe in this storm got really you know, lots of branches that are torn apart or it's bending over or whatever. But for whatever reason in this moment, my tree is standing strong, and I can just stand and bear witness, not make you different, but I can be here with you.
Mhm. I love that. And I love the idea of the image of a tree too, because, people think, again, it's like times are urgent, slow down. When you look at a tree growing, it's doing something, but it doesn't, you can't see it grow unless it's on time lapse photography. And so I use that a lot with my clients. You're growing. You may not see it or explicitly understand it, but you're definitely growing. And I think that speaks to, I love that. Do you want to share a little bit more of the what is it, fourfold path? Is that what it's called?
Four paths of soulful living and grieving. And yes, I'd love to. I
Okay.
use it in many different settings and ways. But essentially, the four paths, and it's very much inspired by the four paths of creation spirituality, which is my doctoral program work that I did. And so
Mhm.
Matthew Fox's work in creation spirituality. But I've renamed the four paths to make them more meaningful and useful for everyday life. And also the work that I do, making it meaningful for really supporting grief. And it's the four paths of really the growth and evolution of the inner life. And so the four paths being resource, release, renewal, and return.
Mhm.
And it's a spiraling. Of course, there's movement in it. I'm very much a movement and body centered person, counselor, therapist, whatever, just
Mhm.
being in the world. So there's a lot of movement in the paths. There's no linearity to them at
Yeah.
all. It's very much spiraling. I mean, if there is a general movement to them, but we can spiral in and through all of them at different times or at the same time or whatever. But
Mhm.
the path of resource is that which strengthens and bolsters us
Mhm.
through difficult times, that which gives us the feel, fills us with the feeling of awe and wonder. I mean, the things that just fill us up, fill our cup, so that it's kind of like it's our tank of our stores of resilience and beauty and wonder and love and all those wonderful feelings. But it's the capacity to recognize and really store them and acknowledge them and seek out those moments of resource so that we can store them. And then release is that path of authentic expression of emotion. It's the movement of emotion. It's really allowing emotions to be real, to be authentic, to be acknowledged, shared, moved, and expressed. And if I go to the tree image, the resource is depicted through the roots in the earth, and the kind of the sun that feeds the trees, the resource, that which nourishes the tree. I think of release as the trunk of the tree, because not only does the trunk um, creates the container, the strength of the container to allow these emotions to move through us. Um, it also creates the strength of container for us to hold and witness each other's difficult and strong emotions, and that kind of burst out through the branches, because when there's a storm, sometimes the branches are cracking off and breaking.
Yeah.
um, but that oftentimes when we allow, not oftentimes, in my experience, really, I don't know a time this hasn't happened for me and people that I witness and companion, that when we allow that authentic expression and that movement of release to move through us, it's not to get rid of, it's just to let the waves give them room to move, that there creates a spaciousness for the path of renewal.
Mhm.
And renewal is that recognizing shifts in energy, new inspiration, creative ideas, just recognitions of something that we hadn't or couldn't recognize before, that now there's just more spaciousness or room to see
Mhm.
things in a different way. So that's renewal. What comes forward
Mhm.
um, when we allow ourselves that capacity to release and move through some of the things that we typically have been conditioned to hold in oftentimes. So the release creates a spaciousness for renewal to come forward. And that also is where we have the capacity to turn towards meaning. Renewal is the path of identifying and recognizing meaning in our life. And then the last fourth path is return, which is once we recognize things that are meaningful to us or things that are newly inspiring or just things that we couldn't feel before, the path of return is then it's not only enough to just grow and evolve and feel good within ourselves, but then to take that and to bring it into action
Mm.
in service to ourselves, and then also in service to others, whether it's our friends, family, community, or larger initiatives, whatever. It's that commitment and that integration of what really has meaning for us, and then how we can return that to the soil, the leaves falling down and returning and composting in the soil to nourish the roots again. So that's the spiraling,
Mhm.
evolution of the four paths.
And I'm surprised I hadn't thought of this before, but The Fall of Freddie the Leaf is like one of my favorite books. You
The
probably
what?
The Fall of Freddie the Leaf by
Oh,
Baglia. I'm sure you read that book.
I don't
No?
know.
Oh my God, you have
Maybe I
to.
have to.
Yeah, it's about grief. It's helping the leaf understand why he needs to fall. So the
Yes.
wise old leaf says, "This is why." And oh gosh, yeah, it's so much like what you're talking about.
Oh, nice. I'll look it up.
Yeah, so it's really it can be a kid's adult book. It's not necessarily just a kid's book, but it's so beautiful. Anyway, I love that. I love that so much. And I like that you clarified it's nonlinear because I think, oh no, where'd you go?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I don't know. I don't see my picture anymore either.
That's really strange. And I'm not gonna stop and start again because the last time I did that, we couldn't get back on. But you can maybe. I'll just keep going. Maybe you want to sign off and sign back in and see if that helps. I have no idea what
Okay,
just happened.
I'll try that.
Okay.
Be right back.
So we're talking to Robyn Hubard, and we're having an incredible conversation about how she helps people move through grief. And she was talking about the Latin word for emotion, or the root means to move through. And we're talking about how we're moving through grief in these times. So hopefully we can get her back here. There she is! Yay! I don't know what happened. It's going 3, 2, 1. You're back. Yay!
Back.
Of course, I have to have at least one or two technical glitches because that's
Of course.
my world these days. But anyway, so what I was saying was how beautiful your work is. It's nonlinear, kind of like I always say, Kubler-Ross's stages of grief aren't linear either. And are you familiar with what David Kessler's added now, the sixth stage of meaning? Which to
Yeah.
me, I think is I'm taking that in my course that I'm creating, transforming grief and fear into love and grace as grace. The
Yeah.
meaning is the grace, and the return, what you're talking about, the return. I also often mention like studies of resiliency show when we have a purpose for our pain, we're able to give back, we're more resilient, like Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. And I know for me, my being able to do the work I do is really my savior, because I feel like, what's the point if I can't help other people move through some of the challenges that I so know about, um, then my wife my life doesn't have as much meaning. And I'm hearing that with you as well. I'm hearing, and I'm feeling it, not just on a cognitive level, but I'm feeling the energy of your mom,
Mm.
moving through you. And I know that I lost my dad when I was 11. I feel that, but of course, fathering and mothering are two very different things, but still, um, how much they're with us, which again is, I think, the grace too, right? Um,
Absolutely.
that we're never ever alone is the big lesson that I got in meditation from both my father and my beloved Lawrence Freedom, is that we're never ever alone.
Yes, absolutely. And that's another thing in our culture too, that we are not used to, or conditioned to kind of even think about that much, typically in
Mhm.
our cultures, to think about the people who've come before us, our ancestors, and honoring them in ways of just memory, like keeping their memory alive. And
Mhm.
that's another big part of, how I approach my work, is not only do I feel my mom and Jeremy and the people who've come before me who have been so meaningful and made such a difference in my life at my back, supporting me. I don't feel like I sit in a room when I'm supporting or companioning, or now outside a lot with clients,
Mhm.
um, by myself. I feel that there's really a lot of not only my ancestors, but I'm really, really opening to, and bringing in, when it feels right, the languaging when it feels right for the client, the um, the reminders that their loved ones and their ancestors are also with them. And
Mm, mm.
that's
I
another
listened to a interview last night. Anne Lamott interviewed Carolyn Mace, because Carolyn Mace has a new book called Intimate Conversations with the Divine. And she said, so Anne says, tell us, one prayer. Just, if you could just give us one short prayer, what would it be? And she said, hover over me
Mm,
is the prayer. Hover over me.
that's so beautiful.
Yeah, and that's what I'm hearing and you saying I'm not alone in this. And what I'm saying, and I'm not alone, is there's angels and guides, and I know the people that I love who've passed on are somehow with me. But really, we that's the grace and the mystery, the mystery of the grace, or the grace and the mystery,
All of it.
because we don't really know, right? It's we know, but we don't know,
Yeah.
I
Or
guess.
there are things we can know for ourselves, but in some strange ways, and it's really about coming to trust, those little things, because that's another thing that I find is that, you know, when when I work with a client and their loved one has died, and they're just not conditioned or used to thinking in ways outside of this linear reality at all,
Mhm.
which I have no preconceived notions or no judgments that I lay, or whatever ideas that I lay over people. But when they say to me, well, it's the strangest thing that this feather is just always dropping in front of me at just the most, unique moments. And I know I have this feeling that my son is with me, or,
Yeah,
whatever it might be. For me, I feel that same way in dragonflies, that come and just hang out around me. I mean, dragonflies don't just hang out very much. So, but really, acknowledging that for people, that knowing that we each do
yeah.
have in our own way, and that is different for everyone, or can be different for everyone, but to just trust those places of knowing that we do have
Yeah,
inside.
yeah. And Clarissa Pinkola Estes, which is another important teacher of mine, in one of her talks, I heard her say something about how her grandmother said to her one day, "Darling, when are you going to realize that this is normal?" What you just described, that, oh, there's the feather. And, so it's like, and I think because of our experiences of losing our parents early in our work with grief, we have um, a frame of reference or a worldview of that. And yes, some people don't. And it, to me, that's the magic and that's the grace. I know we just had the Day of the Dead, and lots of different ways people celebrate, Halloween, November 1st, and All Souls Day, All Saints Day, and Samhain and the Wiccan. So Sunday, which was November 1st, I did a meditation, because I every Sunday send out a meditation in my email. And I invited people to, like, imagine a candle and see someone who's passed on. And shortly after I did that meditation, I walked out to the mailbox and something hit me in the head, and I went, "What was that?" And this thing that hit me in the head landed, and it was a ladybug. And
Oh,
that is the symbol that has come to me from both Lawrence and my mom after their passing. And November 1st, there are no ladybugs,
yeah,
typically
right.
in Colorado. And it's the only one I had seen since the summer when a friend of my son's brought me some ladybugs from his nursery, and they all flew away because I didn't have anything for them to eat in my yard. Um, and so, yeah, it's those that to me is grace. And I got down and I videoed it and I took a close up picture and I was like, oh, thank you. I needed you because, yeah, that's what gets me through. And again, we don't understand that. That's the mystery.
Yeah.
Um, what is Anne Lamont's quote about grace is grace meets us where we are, but does not leave us where it found us. And
Yeah.
I think, again, that's the transformation of, you know, we don't know so many things we don't know.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
thank you so much, Robyn, for spending Friday morning with me and having this important conversation. And I love your model. I actually didn't know all of that until today. So I'm really in awe of it and feel it's extremely important. And I hope people can find you. We're going to get your website in this chat, and people can check in and see if you can support them in some way through this. I also want to mention before we stop that next week I'm flying solo because it is the actual fourth anniversary of having lost Lawrence Freedom. And so I'm going to be reading some things from the book, sharing some of the stories, and we're going to be real raw and vulnerable on that day. And again, with the hopes of giving back, as Robyn and I were saying, and want to share with you how we can move through and be held. Again, all the beautiful images that you gave us, Robyn, the tree and being held, and yeah, moving through. We have
Yeah.
to can't go around it. We have to go through it.
Yeah.
So, is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up today? And
Just
um,
want to say thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, and just, many blessings to all of us, right? It's just to hold that tenderness of our tender hearts through these
yeah,
difficult times and through the holidays. And
yeah,
it's just
yeah,
my wish for all of us that we can stay connected to our hearts.
yeah, and each other. So,
Yeah.
thank you for this connection today. Well, love you all. Thanks for joining us. And yeah, join me next week when I fly solo and tell you all about letters to freedom.
Look
All
forward.
right. Yeah. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.